Welcome, everybody. This is workshop 5. This is probably going to be the last workshop of the semester. And of course, today we are going to be covering making some user interfaces in Python. So I'm going to present my screen here, and I will share it with you very shortly. All right, so yeah, some user interfaces with Python. So the program that we're going to be using, or the library that we're going to be using, is Tkinter, and you can kind of see an example of one of the styles on the right side of the screen here. But first, I'm going to be turning it over to, by the way, is everybody set up with Python? Everybody have it installed? Thumbs up, head nods. Okay, sweet. So I'm going to turn it over to Jackie real quick, and he's going to give a brief overview of kind of what Python is.
So just as for a brief review of Python, so Python is an object-oriented language, and overall it's very easy to learn and read in terms of syntax. There's also an interactive mode, which is basically just a command line. So you're able to type in parts of your code and instantly see the response. So on the screen, you can see a picture of it. And because of how popular the Python programming language is, there's a large variety of libraries that you can use. So you can do things such as image processing, plotting, and GUI programming, which is what we're going to be doing today. And we're going to be doing all that using the built-in IDE for Python called idle.
Sweet. Thanks, Jackie. So yeah, as he said, you have two different modes, the interactive mode and then the IDE that he mentioned is what we're going to be using today mostly. And then Will is going to go over some of the review for those who haven't touched Python in a while.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume some basic knowledge of Python and programming languages in general, but if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. So we're going to start with some of the basic data types. Here's a couple of numerical data types. You have integers. These are all your non-fractional, negative, and positive numbers. Your floating point numbers, float. If you've taken 270, you're familiar with them already. These are just numbers with a fractional component, any number with a decimal point. And next slide. Python has a couple of different ways to represent sequences. List and tuple are just two of them. They're pretty similar. A list is just a sequence of elements. You denote them with square brackets, and you get individual elements with an index. So for example, on the right, you see there's a list of characters. If I wanted to get the third character, O, I would reference the index 2. Tuples are less common. They're denoted with parentheses, and they're like lists, but you can't change them after they have been declared. A couple of other important types. There's a string. A string is basically a list of characters, but you denote them with double quotes or single quotes. You can treat them as if they're a list. So for example, if we had a string in Python that said hello, and we wanted to get the letter O, we could say the string and then reference index 4. There's also Boolean values in Python, either true or false. Python's kind of weird because you have to capitalize true or false, like you can see down there. In some other languages, you could get away with doing like all lowercase, but Python likes theirs uppercase. And there's a whole bunch of other types in Python. We're not going to get into it just for the sake of time, but if you're interested, there's a lot of resources online for you to look into those.
Yeah. Also, just to mention, this dictionary, we actually do use this in the second program that I'm going to be covering way later on in the workshop. Just keep that in mind.
So basic Python syntax. Python runs line by line. It's an interpreted language. So if you want to make a comment in Python, if you want Python to skip a line, you can use a, excuse me for a second. Okay. You can use a hashtag or pound sign. As you can see kind of by the declare x as float, it won't run that, it'll skip that. If you're familiar with other programming languages, you might be familiar with multi-line commenting. Python doesn't really have that. If you are in Computer Science 132, they do use triple, single, or double quotes as a sort of way to do multi-line commenting. But there's no official way to do Python multi-line commenting except for having a pound sign for each line. When it comes to declaring variables, Python is not statically typed. And what that means in English is you don't need to tell Python what type of variable it's going to be. So in like Java or C++, if you want to declare an integer x, you would have to say int x equals and then an integer, or yeah, stuff like that. But Python, you don't need to do that. You can, if you want to declare x as a float, you literally say x equals float. Declare it as a string, x equals, and then a string. Python kind of figures it out. And Python's really cool in that you can change the type of a variable, even once it's been declared. When it comes to naming variables, they cannot start with a number, and they can only contain alphanumeric characters and the underscore. Are there any questions before we go on? I know I went through that kind of fast. Okay, well, great. If there's no questions, then I'll go on to conditionals. So Python has a bunch of specific ways to compare values in order. There's in order of how they're presented on screen. You have less than, greater than, less than or equal to than, greater than or equal to, not equal to, and equal to. Those return a true or false value. Python has if, else if, and else statements, just like in other programming languages. If you look on the right here, you can say if x equals y, x is greater than y, excuse me. It's pretty plain how Python does this. You say if, some conditional, and then you have the colon there. And then the block of code that you want the if statement to run starts on the next line and is indented once. Python makes heavy use of indentation, but it does not use curly brackets for conditionals or loops, which we'll get to in a second, like in other languages. The only time you will use curly brackets in Python is for dictionaries. Yep, and then elif is just the Python way of saying else if, and then you have else. Those behave the same as in other programming languages. Loops, you have your while loop, which will run until a condition is false. To declare one of those, you say while, then the condition, a colon, and then on the next line, and every line that you want to be in that while loop, you have it indented once. For loop, to declare that, you say for some variable in and then an iterable. And an iterable is just something where where Python can step through. So like a list, you can go through each element of a list, for example. I have an example on the right here. The range function, you can see for I in range 10. What the range function does is it returns a sequence of all the numbers from all the integers from 0 to whatever number you give it, -1. So range 10 will return 0 through 9. And then for I in range 10, it will print the numbers 0 through 9. The next one is another way you can use for loops in Python. In this case, X is not a range, it's a list. So instead of printing like a set of numbers, it will just print each element in the list. So the second for loop will print Python, Java, and C++. That was a really, really fast overview of, or refresher on Python. Yeah, any questions before we move on? Great, awesome.
Sweet. So just kind of getting into more of the Tkinter side of things, you'll hear us refer to it as Tkinter, but commonly it is derived from the TK interface. So the correct way would be Tkinter to pronounce it. But these are a couple of different programs that are using this library that's built into the Python ecosystem. So you can see on the left here, we have, it's a plotting program. You have a bunch of parameters that you can put in. You can see different plot points off on the left, the lower left-hand corner. And then of course, on the big right side of that screen, you can see that there's actually a plot. Now, we were talking about this before the workshop started, and we don't know exactly what this is using, but we're thinking it's using some sort of math function to display within the interface. So instead of bringing up a new window, it just displays it directly in the interface, which is pretty cool. And then there's some buttons down there. It looks like you can configure the different parameters of the graph. You can save it. Looks like there are a couple different pages in there. So obviously a lot of functionality built into that program, the scale block wizard on the left. On the right, you'll see that there's actually a Tetris game that is completely written in Python. So Jackie, if you still have that link, go ahead and paste it in the chat. And then if you guys are interested, it has the full code on this website, and you can go ahead and copy paste it in, and it should run Tetris just fine. And it gives a nice explanation towards the end of that web page that shows how, you know, blocks are rotated using a certain math function, and there are different algorithms for solving, you know, whenever a line falls, it's filled up, it gets cleared, stuff like that. So if that's something you're interested in, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and check that out after the workshop, of course. But continuing on, I'm going to pass it over to Jack now, and he's going to give you a little bit of an interview into Tkinter and how to get started with the library.
All right, so Tkinter, or programming with Python in Tkinter, or I guess programming with Tkinter in Python, is actually pretty simple. It's at its basis, it's just layering correctly and coding in correct orders. And so if you look on the left there, here's the correct order to layer. First, you want to initialize Tkinter by importing it, because as I'll show you in a minute, it's not, while it's native to Python, you actually have to import it. It's a native library in Python, but Python won't recognize the commands unless you import it in. Then you're going to want to set up your class or a constructor or some sort of thing like that, so that you can actually work with the library. And then you want to create widgets, pack widgets, and create the main loop, which will create the actual GUI, which I'll cover this in just a moment. But that's basically, those are basically the 4 steps you need to create a simple GUI. Now, of course, you can get very, very layered. You can create widgets within widgets, and widgets within widgets within widgets within widgets. It can get very, very layered and very, very complex. I'll also define a couple of things in case you guys don't know what those mean. So a widget is just a standard GUI element. So it can be anything from like a text label, entries, menus, buttons, things like that. When I say pack, it's just the method that Tkinter uses to specify the positioning of widgets within their specific container within the GUI. So you can specify left, right, top, bottom. If you don't specify anything, it just centers it for you. Further, a frame is a specific type of widget, which will, sorry about that. Frame is a specific type of widget used to contain other widgets, so that you can organize the GUI the way that you want. So if you want, like in what Ethan was talking about, if you want your graph to be on the left side or the right side, you can specify that using a frame, and then you pack widgets into that frame. Now, this is sort of starting to get a little bit complex. So if we want to go to the next slide, I can show you a very simple way to code just a very simple label with a GUI, and I'll run that for you. All right, so here we have, it's like 4 or 5 lines of code, but I'm going to walk you through it, and then I'll actually share my screen and show you what it would look like if you ran it. So the first line of code we have is importing Tkinter as TK. So like I had mentioned, Tkinter is a native library to Python, but you have to import it to actually use it and take control of it and stuff like that. Then we are going to instantiate the Tkinter class as root, just so we can refer to that later down in the main loop. We're going to create a widget called label, and we're going to define that label with, so when we use widgets and things, we have to, because we've instantiated it, we use the dot or the decimal parameter to actually call that method in from the Tkinter library. So we say the text we want to be hello world, and the pad X and the pad Y, that just specifies in terms of the X coordinate and Y coordinate how large it is. And then we want to pack the widget, and then we create the main loop. And that's just the 4 simple steps that I had mentioned before. Now I'm going to share my screen here, or attempt to. Here we go. Oh geez, let's see. Share screen. All right, so here we have the same code that I was just talking about. If you go in here and run it in Python, I'm gonna drag over the GUI. It usually will put the GUI like up in your top left, but this is just what we created with that code. Now it's very basic. There's no entry here. It's just a text label, but there are a lot of different types of widgets you can use. So I'll go over that now. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and go back into the slides, and I'll talk about a bit more of a complex example. Oh, well, first I'll actually talk about making our GUI aesthetic, because sometimes you want to have different text or different text size or maybe different colors, things like that. Make it look pretty, you know? So there are lists and lists and lists of available colors and fonts. There's like hundreds of fonts and hundreds of specific colors. You can find those all online just by Googling like Tkinter fonts, Tkinter colors. There's way too many to list here, but it's basically any color that you want, you can use. So just a small example here, using the same code that we had just had, I could say the label is equal to tk.label root text equals Merry Christmas. FG stands for foreground color. Just think of that as your text color. The BD, that's the background size. So I want the background of the background color, which is the next thing, BG, to be a size 5 around the text. And then BG is the actual, like, think of that as sort of like a highlight. It's behind the text. And so that's, like I said, that was set to 5. And then we want the font to be Arial, and we want the size of that font to be size 10. Again, there are a ton of fonts and colors online that you can find. But now I'm going to take us into a bit more of a complex example.
Actually, let me just jump in real quick. Where it says the foreground and background colors, the red and green, it'll actually take any hex value to a hexadecimal color pointer. So if you go like color hex chart or something on Google, you could like click any color imaginable that you'd want. It'll spit out a hex string, and you pop it in there and it'll give you that color as well.
Oh, I didn't actually know that. That's good to know.
Just found that out before we started.
Oh, great. Well, anyways, here's a more complex example. So you'll notice, again, this is just code that I copied right out of idle and put in here. So when I run it for you after I'm done explaining it, it's going to look exactly the same. But you'll notice that I'm not importing Tkinter as TK now, because I'm going to use a class. Now, a class is just a simple container. If you're not familiar with what a class is a simple container used a lot in object-oriented programming so that you can contain things and refer to them later in your code. We're not going to be covering classes themselves in this, but you can find a lot of information online if you Google it. Anyways, though, it's important, or it can be very important and useful to use classes, especially for your GUI, because normally you're going to be using a GUI with a lot of code when you want to display something or maybe get user input. So using a class to refer to your GUI is a lot simpler, and so you can organize your code more, and so that others, if they look at your code, can follow it easier. So anyways, first we're going to import Tkinter. Then I'm going to create the class and the constructor for the class, and I just call it example GUI, and then I initialize the class, which for this, we're not going to actually put anything in there because, again, this is a very simple example. Then we're going to create some frames. So frames, like I said, are special widgets which can hold other widgets, and that allows you to layer things. So I'm going to create 2 frames for this example, frame 1 and frame 2. And then I'm going to move on to working and creating the frame 1 widgets. So for the first frame, I'm just going to create a title label. So I'm going to say self.title is equal to tkinter.label. And then I want to specify that I'm referring that and want that in self.frame1. So that's going to be in my first frame. That's where I want it. And then I'm going to say, oh, well, I want the text to be example. I want the border of the color around the text to be size 15. I want the background color to be blue, the text color to be red, and the font to be Arial size 15. And then after I've done that, I want to pack the frame one widgets into frame one. So you'll notice that as I get more and more, as you layer more and more widgets in, you'll have self.title.x.y.blah blah blah dot pack. You need to make sure, and this is very important, because if you have errors in learning Tkinter or running your Tkinter code, you'll notice that most of them because you're not packing things correctly. So I always like to, when I'm coding with Tkinter, to leave these comments for myself so that I don't forget to pack things in the correct order. But anyways, so after I've packed the frame one widgets into frame one, I'm going to work on the frame two widgets. So I'm going to have a prompt, and the prompt is just going to be another label that asks a user to enter their name. So I'm going to say self.prompt equals self.prompt equals tkinter.label. And now I'm referring to frame two. So I'm going to say self.frame2, and then I specify the text that I want. Now I don't want to specify any colors or any font for that. So I'm just going to leave that area blank. And then I'm going to ask the user for an entry. So an entry is just like a text box where someone can type something in. So for this example, I'm just going to have the user type in their name. So self.name entry equals tkinter.entry. Again, we're referring to frame two there, and the width is just how wide the entry it is itself. That doesn't really matter. It's just more for the user to see everything they've typed in. The computer will recognize, or I guess the program will recognize everything that you type into the entry, regardless of the width that you specify. That's just for the user to see. Then again, following the layering system, the 4 steps, I'm going to pack the frame 2 widgets into frame 2 itself. So we do that with those 2 lines of code, and then we want to pack the frames themselves into the main window. So even though I've packed frame 1 widgets into frame 1, I haven't yet packed frame 1 and frame 2 into the main window. So it's important to do that, otherwise they won't show up when you run your code. Then I'm going to enter the main loop, which is just tkinter.mainLoop. That's just a function that tells Tkinter I'm done with my code. It's time to start the loop. And then because I coded this with a class system, instead of our last example, you have to actually create an instance of the GUI. And you can just do that by instantiating it in and calling it. So yeah, that hopefully you guys were able to follow that pretty easily. If you have any questions, please ask before I move on, and I'll share my screen and show you what this GUI looks like. Are there any questions?
I actually do have a question.
All right.
So just to expand a little bit on the whole class concept, one of the things, I guess a different way of explaining it is that a class is essentially a blueprint for an object, and objects you can make multiple instances of. And so what I'm thinking here is that using a class to define your GUI, and I could be wrong here, so this is why I'm asking. My thought is that using a class to define your GUI or a certain part of your GUI would allow you to create multiple instances of that, and then therefore have multiple windows.
Yes,
Is that true?
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And that can be useful again in a lot of different types of coding based on what your goal is with the coding. And it's very variable, I guess, and it's very easy to work with. And so again, I prefer generally when coding with Tkinter to use a class, even if I'm not going to be using a lot of code, just because in my mind, I guess it's easier for me to organize it and see what's going on. Of course, you don't have to, but that's just the way that I prefer. Anyways, I'm going to share my screen now and get this code up so that you guys can see it. Again, it's the exact same code I've got on the screen there.
Yeah, does anybody need another second to copy this, by the way, if you are following along? because all of this will be posted after the fact as well. I know we probably could have had it posted for you now, but when this recording goes up, all of the links to these files that we're using should be in the description of that video, and that's going to be shared out next week. But does anybody want some time to copy, or you guys want to keep moving on? All right, I'm just seeing shrugs, so you guys got this. I have faith in you.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This is going to stop your sharing. Oh, okay, there we go.
I just stopped it. We're good.
Yeah. So I will, again, I'll adjust this really quick so that you can see all my code. It's literally the exact same code that was in there. And when I run it, it's going to pull up. For me, it pulls up in the top left corner. I assume that's what it does for everybody. But here's what the GUI looks like itself. Now, the yellow part, again, that's because I specified it here. I don't know, can you guys see my mouse? Or can you not see my mouse? Can you see my mouse?
We can see it.
Okay, perfect. So I specified here that the background, oh, it just keeps disappearing every time I click. I specified here that the background size of the yellow color is 15. So that's why it looks a little bit bigger. You can, of course, change that based on what you want. And of course, you don't even need a background color as was displayed with the enter your name label. But then it allows me to just type in my name here. Oh, not even spell my name correctly. But like I had mentioned, see, my name goes past to the width of 10. That doesn't matter except that I can't see it, but the program will still recognize my full name there, and it will return. Now, normally you would have another button and you'd have more frame things. And so when you click the button, it does something with the entry, but I didn't want to get that complex. Ethan's going to get a little bit more complex here with his example. But yeah, it just allows you to get input from the user, which can be really, really useful, especially if you want to get a lot of input from a lot of users really quickly. All right, now I'm going to hand it over to Ethan, where he's going to talk about a bit more of a complex example using actual functionality.
Yeah. So, yeah, how about something more functional? A lot of programs that you're going to be writing are going to want to be interactive. So they're going to be taking a user's input and showing some form of output as a result of that. Or, you know, if you're working on more of the back end stuff, you want somebody to enter, you know, their name, their height, their weight. If you're, say this is like a medical use, and it's going to enter that into some database. Well, you can automate that all with Python, but it's nice to have that front end. So now we're going to be creating a program for taking notes or having a to-do list of sorts. And we're going to use what we've learned so far that Jackie, Will, and Jack have all covered. And we're going to add a couple more advanced features onto this, like button pressing. We're not going to have a button press per se, but we're going to be using keyboard keys to start some different functions. Before I do this, though, just wanted to hear from you guys. What are some thoughts, some questions? Just, you know, give a couple minutes to talk out loud, think out loud, if you want to. Floor is yours for a couple minutes.
So I've taken, I think, Computer Science 131.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of covered some of the GUI for Python. But I'm thinking in Computer Science 132, will it have much of this stuff too or not?
So I'm a bad judge of that because I took 121 and 122 on the old program for EE.
If you want, I can jump in here and answer that, because I actually took 131 and 132. And like you had mentioned, I actually learned to code Tkinter in my 131 class. I've been hearing that they don't teach that anymore. I don't know. I had Al Verbenek. So that you can confirm that they don't teach it anymore.
132 and 131 do not do GUI stuff as far as I know.
So I was going to say, in my 131 class, we covered GUIs, and 132 we did not. So as long as you, assuming that things run true for the past, and as long as you have, I always called her Griselda. I don't know her last name, but assuming that you have her for as your 131 professor, you will not cover GUIs in 132.
I already took 131 with the same professor you just mentioned.
Oh, okay. So she teaches 131 and 132 now.
Really?
He does 221 too, and that's GUIs, but it's Java.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, in 132, they, as far as I'm aware, they do not cover GUIs.
Thanks.
Just
Yeah.
a random question, but has anybody here taken that class, the comp sci Java GUI class?
I actually took that as well. Yeah, that's with Al.
I did.
And there's the GUI is a lot more complex, but you can also do a lot more. It's a lot easier to work with than the Python one because you can, you actually get a GUI to make GUIs, but it's also a lot of very complex Java and object-oriented programming. That's like one of our final projects is making the GUI.
Is that using JavaFX?
That's Java. That's just Java.
Or
NetBeans
is it
and
Swing?
JavaDB, you get a little bit of database in it too.
Yeah.
Okay. So is it Swing, or is it for the front end? I mean, is it Swing or JavaFX or something else?
It's something else. I forget what it was called. I can look that up while
think
Ethan
it's
finishes the
Debian.
workshop, and I can get an answer to you
I
by
could
the
be
end.
wrong, but I think it's Debian is what it's called.
Hmm.
Or Apache. No, that was the database. Never mind.
And
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think JavaFX is really in favor too much anymore. I could be wrong on that, but every modern Java GUI thing I've seen, I don't know about PSU classes, but has been Swing, not JavaFX.
So
That's
does
out of
comp
my
sci
realm at
actually
all.
favor Swing?
What was that?
What was
So
that?
does the comp sci department actually favor Swing over anything else, or?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I was under the impression that Swing was the deprecated one of the two, which I think JavaFX at this point is also deprecated now, but they're both pretty old.
Yeah. Be something to look up. A couple of the co-host guys that are in here. If you do have some time while I'm talking, just look it up, throw it in the chat so we can get people on the right track. Adam, you also took 221, you said?
Yeah, I took 221 and I took 131, 132 also, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just looked it up quickly in my old Canvas class. So we use Apache Derby for the databases, and then we use something called NetBeans, which is like an IDE for
the
Java.
IDE.
Yeah. So that's what we use to make the GUI. And again, we used Apache Derby for the databases.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so you're using Swing then. You're just using the IDE functionality to
Yeah.
instantiate, or not instantiate your classes, but to generate your classes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
it's
makes
just
sense.
an API. That class is not that bad though. Al's the GOAT. Super easy class.
Sweet. Hey, it's nice to have some feedback to actually hear how what people think about these classes, because usually at the end of the semester we hold kind of like a town hall, and we give feedback on a lot of the EECS classes. So definitely, if you have strong feelings one way or another, even if you don't have strong feelings, I would recommend coming to that. It's held by IEEE, and if you're on the list, like the listserv, you'll get a notification for it. All you got to do is swing by for like 15 minutes and be like, hey, I hated this professor. Or, like Griselda is the best CS professor that I've ever had,
Does it have impact on them, or is it just people venting?
It actually does. If we have enough valid concerns, the teachers do get feedback. It does get processed through. So
Interesting.
yeah, definitely keep it in mind. There have been a couple of changes over the last 2 to 3 years that I've seen through these town halls. So
I'm definitely going to be taking advantage of that this semester.
yeah, absolutely. I figure a lot of people are going to have strong feelings.
Oh yeah.
So, all right. Anyway, I'll continue on. I'm going to stop sharing my whole screen, and then I'm going to get my idle code here ready. So what I'm going to do is, hopefully this should paste correctly into the chat. I'm going to be adding to everybody. This is a Google Drive link. It should be taking you to a piece of skeleton code that I'm going to be using as the basis of what we're going to be running here. Don't expect it to run right away. It's missing a lot of things. It's meant for you to fill in. But if you don't want to type up this stuff, you don't have to. I'm going to be typing it on screen. You can kind of just copy, or I'll be providing the code after the fact, and you have all of that to reference as well. So let me go ahead on over to this. Oh, I didn't mean to. Oh, I can't minimize Zoom. All right, that's fine, I suppose. Let me get up my code here. So I'm only going to be sharing half of the screen, but it should be plenty to see what I'm working on. So can everybody see this window of idle that I have open?
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. And then I'm also going to minimize that. All right. So this is going to be the basis of what we're going to be working on today. You can see at the beginning, we have the same import statement. We're going to be importing the Tkinter library as just TK. So whenever we refer to TK lowercase, we're going to be referring to that library. So at first, we're going to be having this class to do, which is going to be based off of the TK, the Tkinter library that we're importing. And again, this is going to be the class that Jack was telling us about not too long ago. We're going to be setting up an initializing function here, so the init, and then we're also going to need to super initialize because this is kind of like a baby. This follows the whole inheritance thing. I would really encourage you, if you're curious, to look it up. There's going to be a lot more detailed information than what I can provide here, mostly because I myself have forgotten a lot of the Python things that I've learned in the past. So we're going to need to set up a code to show the tasks in the window. There aren't many great ways of doing this right off the bat, so we're going to have to go do a little bit of a convoluted kind of setup here. So the easiest way to do this right now is say, hey, if there are no tasks in our to-do list that we're creating, don't show any tasks. So we can just say self.tasks. And we're just going to make this an empty list. There's just going to be nothing there. Else, we want to show whatever tasks are in there. We want to have those loaded up. So the self.tasks. And if I spell something wrong, please shout it out because it's bound to happen. Just equals tasks. And we're going to be setting up that variable later on. You'll see that there. Before we get to that, though, we're going to have to set up our window, what the size is, what we want it to be titled. So for me, I'm just going to title mine. Let's see. What do I want to title this? Let's just call it like to-do app. I think that works. So to-do app. And so you can rename it to whatever you want. This is just what's going to appear in the top whenever you open a window. Say you open like a window of Minecraft. The very top bar, it's going to say Minecraft or whatever, Google Chrome. And then let's also set the size of the window. We don't want this to be too big. So I think a size of like 300 by 400 pixels is pretty decent for one of these small programs. But this is going to be using the geometry function. So self.geometry. And then we're going to set this by, so 300 by 400. And so using this, you can see it takes a string. It'll actually interpret that string as width by height, I believe. Definitely double check me because I'm probably going to say something wrong. So we also want a label to be at the top of this, kind of just give like a welcome or something that's right underneath the header of the window. So I have this set up here as just to do one. So this is going to be like our first little to-do thing. And we can actually add some text to it. So we need to declare it as self to start out with. But adding some text, we can just say something along the lines of, I'm going to just give these little spacers like add items here. So after that, we want to set the background and the foreground to an appropriate color for the background. Again, you can set your program to whatever you'd like. I'm just going to set mine to light gray, which is indeed a color in here. And it's gray spelled with an E. And then the foreground, so this is what the text color is going to be. I'm going to be setting as, oops, black. There we go. Just make sure I'm getting the right things. And then some Y padding. So some height padding to this. I'm going to do pad Y. And we're going to set this equal to 10. So it's going to be about 10 pixels above and 10 pixels below. It's just not going to display anything. And I say pixels, but it's more of like a height unit used here. It's going to be different depending on the screen that you're using and then depending on the operating system as well. So before I go any further, do we have any questions? Is there anything that you guys want to address? Go ahead and just scroll through so I see if anybody's talking. If not, we can continue on. Are people following along generally though? Like, are you typing this out as I'm going through it? Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right. I can only assume you guys are following along. Again, this isn't a lecture. It is a workshop. It's meant to be a little bit more interactive. So if you want to interrupt me, you're more than welcome to. I have my screen up over here and I can see if somebody's yelling at me. Also, Cole, I know you said you got to go before 8. So like I said, I'll be sending out the recording of this probably sometime early next week, or maybe this weekend, whenever I get around to it. So it'll all be here for you when you're ready.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'm probably going to head out now. Thanks. Just
all right.
Say a little bit more. But yeah, I got the skeleton code. So whenever you just send me the link.
Awesome. Thanks for stopping by.
Right. Thank you. See ya.
See ya. All right. No other questions? We can keep going. All right, sweet. So after this, we have our heading. We have, just kind of a basic setup for the very top of our bar. But the idea is we have this top area, and then we want a big section, kind of like a notepad almost, that's going to be for individual to-do items that we're going to be adding to this later on. So let's go ahead and say, for adding the other labels, they're going to be appended onto this. Think of it almost like as a list of items. They're going to be appended on underneath. So we can go ahead and just say self.tasks.append. And then the to-do one is going to be at the very top. That's this header. And there's this region that we're going to have them in here to live. They're just going to be living there. Also, there's some existing code here that you'll see. This for task in self tasks, we're going to pack them on, and then we're going to fill them in. It's going to be, anchored to the top of the window is going to be anchored to the one above it. So we have to do, and then the next task that we add on is going to be anchored. The top of the next one is going to be anchored to the one above that. It's kind of the way of interpreting this little code that I'm using here. Next, we're going to want to add a text box where we can enter some text for our to-do items. So that is just simply adding this in right here. The background is going to be white. So we just want an all white background. The foreground is going to be black, which means that the text is just going to be black there. And then it's going to have a height of 3. So when we're working with text, when it says a height of 3, it means text lines. So it's going to have 3 different lines of text, and that's going to be the max amount of text that you can add to it. So we're going to call this to denote the creation text used. So we actually want to pack this in here. One second. Using this code. So self.task_create. And you'll see that we're using this. Oh yeah, so this is going to be denoting the creation text. So that's why it says task.create. That's this text here. He's going to be using this text box. I was wondering what that comment meant. Obviously, you need to get better at adding more detailed comments. So now we're going to put this at the bottom of the window. I think I should have had this above that line, but no matter. And then we're going to pack this in. So pack, yes. So we're going to be looking at the side of this that's going to be packed against there, and it's going to be tk.bottom. So this is just how it's going to be arranged. It's going to be below the first one. This is going to be at the very bottom of the window. And then we're going to use a fill here, which if you're not familiar with the fill command in TK, we're not going to cover it today. But it basically just means like take up a certain amount of space on the X. So we're using this up here. It's going to fill the whole window, no matter how far you stretch it. Width, it's going to fill up that width. But if you do height, it's not going to stretch that way. Same thing here as well. I guess I did just cover it. I said we weren't going to cover it, and I ended up covering it anyway. Anyway, right below that, there should be a space here. We want, as soon as you open up the program, we want the cursor to be in that text box. So as soon as you launch the program, you're going to be ready to type in the text box. You don't need to click anything. You don't need to hit enter. You don't need to tab around. We just want it on there. And we use the focus set command to do so. So what we can do is actually just take this self.task_create, and then we're going to do .focus and then _set. Don't need to add anything in the parentheses. There are no parameters. We just, on opening this, we want the focus to be set there. So we have text that we've put in to this text box, say. We have, get milk is the text that we've entered. We want a way to send that to the rest of the program to identify like, hey, you should add this task to the list. And then the bind command is going to be what we're going to be using here. And this is going to be used for almost all of the different functionality, interactive functionality of the Tkinter GUIs. So this, we're going to be using self.bind. So this is just identifying that this is going to be a, almost like an identifier of, hey, if we do this action, there's a word for it that I'm looking for. If we do this action, it's going to cause something else to happen in the program. There's probably a word for it that's slipping my mind. If anybody knows a word for it, definitely shout it out. But the return key is going to be used for the enter. And you can see in here, we have to put it in these brackets here. So like less than, greater than symbols. And so that is going to initiate the add task function, which we're going to be covering now. So it should just be self.add task, just like that. Oops, that was wrong. Hit enter instead of shift. It happens when you type with one hand. The next thing you'll see here is the self.color schemes. These are two different color schemes that we're setting up so that we can have kind of alternating color schemes. So we add one to-do item, and it's going to show a certain color scheme. And then the next to-do item is going to be showing a different color scheme here. So I won't go into that too much. Just know that that is two different color schemes that we're going to be using. Okay. Any questions up until this point? Anybody not understand why we're packing things in the way that we are?
Just wondering what was the context behind that little where you forgot that term? I sort of stopped listening. So
Oh, for which term?
You just said that you were looking for a term that slipped your mind.
So like when there's an action, when an action occurs and it causes something else to happen in the program. I feel like there was a term that I was going to use for it. It wasn't flag. I don't think it was a flag. There was something that I was going to say, but I forget it. Just completely slipped off my mind.
Yeah, flag is probably my best guess.
Yeah, I don't know. But just know that you're pressing the enter key. It's binding that to initiate this function here, this add task, which we're going to get to in just a second. Any other questions so far? We're all good?
Is it call? Is that what you're looking for?
Maybe the action calls a function. That makes sense in my head. But yeah, I'm not sure. Good word though. Good word. Good try. Good try. All right. Somebody's saying in the chat. Oh, Adam said now. Hey, thank you, Adam, for stopping by. Appreciate it. All this is going to be recorded and will be posted after the fact. So whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and finish following along with it.
Great. Thanks, guys. See ya.
See ya. All right. Continuing on, we want to add some tasks in here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my chat window. So first and foremost, we need to get the data from the text box and then clear the text box. So the next time we go ahead and try to add a task, it's not re-adding that text onto whatever we're trying to do. So first and foremost, we need to create this task text. And we're just going to use task underscore text. And then this is going to be using that task create text box here, this text field. So we're going to use task underscore text equals self dot task underscore create. And then we're going to do dot get, and this is going to get the data from there. It's already in the form of a string, so we don't have to modify it at all. And then we're going to do 1.0 and then tk.end. So this is going to take it from the very first letter that's in there and then go all the way to the end. And then we need to clear it using the dot strip command. So it's just dot strip and then open close parentheses there. So we're going to get that data, put it into the task underscore text variable, and then we're going to strip out all of the data that's in the text box. So it becomes a blank text box. Everybody got that so far? That's decently simple compared to everything that we've done so far. But down here in the if length task text is greater than 0, we only want a task to be created if there is text in this field. Otherwise, you just have nothing there, and you can keep hitting the enter key as many times as you want, and it makes a bunch of blank tasks. We don't want that, and you'll see why a little bit later. So let's go ahead and start up just a new task. And it's going to be creating a label, same as what we did up in the to-do. You'll find that this is actually very similar, the way that we're setting this up. So just tk.label, and this is going to be referencing itself. And the text within the label is going to be, the task text from back up here. So again, that has everything that we had put into the text box previously. And then we also want some Y padding, some height padding, the same amount as we want as that first little to-do header that we have, so that they look pretty uniform. You can change the size of these actually. So if we wanted to, we could change the size of these. So I was going to do pad Y equals 10, but you can change that to like 8 or 7. I think you can go all the way down to 5 and still have it decently readable. And maybe we'll experiment with that coming back. Let me just go ahead and put a bunch of these here so that I can come back and experiment with that later. And if I forget, remind me, please. So this little block of text here, we're not going to really be touching that. This is some text that's going to alternate the color schemes of the tasks. So the first task, you'll notice up here, had a background of light gray and a foreground of black. So we want the next one to have something different than that, I should say. Also, let me go ahead and get up. I'm just going to show you what we're looking at so far. I'm not going to show you the entry commands and stuff yet, but I'll show you what we've done so far in this code. Tkinter. I'm going to hide that from you. So if we run this module, you see that this pops up. This is what we have so far, okay? You'll see that this to-do one label is at the top. So this is named differently. This is to-do app, and the other one is to-do app v1. So we have this add items here. That we have a bunch of space. So this is linked to the top And you'll see that it's packed to the top using this little function. And then we also have this text box, which is packed to the bottom, which you can see using this function. It's the side function, actually. It's really a modifier within the pack function, I should say. And I can go ahead and type in here. I'm not going to hit enter because we haven't gotten that far in the code that we're building. But does this help everybody visualize kind of what we're working on a little bit better? Thumbs up. All right, sweet. There we go. All right, I'll close that. Also, this is just what the Python shell looks like. And this will pop up every single time that you run something. Go ahead and close this as well. All right. We will keep working on this. This is going to be alternating colors back and forth using this, this little div mod thing here. So it's going to alternate the style choice, and it's going to add the my scheme choice. It's going to set that alternating. And so we're just setting the background and the foreground appropriately. This is actually one of those dictionaries that Will had talked about earlier on in his Python syntax review. So we have one dictionary item that's going to be defining, or this whole entire thing. It's a list of dictionary items. The background is going to be defining light gray. The foreground is going to be defining black. And the same thing for the other side. That makes sense? Listening to it in my head didn't make sense, but I hope it made sense when I talked out loud. We good? Sweet. Okay, so now we're going to be packing this new task that we've created. We've already set up the new task label here. So whenever I'm referring to something, I'm usually going to be highlighting the name, and then I'm going to be highlighting what it even is, because sometimes it's easy to get lost in the sea of code, especially when you're using new task, task text, self-task text, self.task underscore create. Stuff like that. There's just a lot of things going on. And I can probably better space out my code as well. Let's go ahead and we'll just give a couple of spaces here. I think it's only fair to you guys. Hopefully that's a little bit easier to read. All right, we're going to continue on packing this new task that we've created. So can anybody tell me, how do we start by doing this? It's going to be very similar to the one that we did before. Yes? Can anybody give me kind of like a little code snippet that we might use here based on what we've done in the past?
Will it be self new task?
So we don't actually need to use self here because we're just referring to this new task that we've created.
Okay,
But,
so only.
So yeah, go ahead. So new task.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's very similar to something that we've done in the past.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the one we did in the past. What's the one?
Yeah, so look at the first label that we created, the to-do label, and then go a few lines down from there. There should be a pack function, and we want to basically copy that.
Oh yeah, I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Dot pack.
Dot pack.
Where do we want?
What's that?
Where do we want it? The new task.
I don't know. Where do you want it? we can line it up how I had the idea of, under that first label. So if we want to do that, we're going to be packing it to the top of the free space that we have in the middle. Because remember, we have that label at the top, we have the text box at the bottom, we've got a bunch of free space in the middle. So we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we'll just do side equals tk dot top. For some reason, top is capitalized. And there's one more thing that we want to do.
Is it the fill?
Yeah, so we wanted to fill it on the X side, so it's going to stretch to the width. Like I said, this is an almost direct copy from up above.
So I think one of the problem I had before with the GUI is when like the geometry and a filling of space
is kind of like it looks ugly.
Yeah, it does. Until you get like really good at managing where stuff is put, it looks funky. Yeah.
And I think the fill also help here.
Mhm. Yeah, and you'll notice that whenever we go to stretch this, it'll fill up that space, so it won't look like, oh, you just have this solid block and there's still a ton of window on both sides.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is just a nice way. The fill is a nice way of proportioning your sections.
Yeah.
Sweet. So yeah, that was exactly what we wanted to do. And we had created a list up here. So this self.tasks.append, we're going to be using that again. So I'm just going to copy this. We want to append the new task onto the list that we have. So this list of tasks that we're doing. So instead of the to-do one, which is the header, we're going to be using new task. So you see how a lot of this is using the same elements and the same configurations, but just in different places. So in Jack's example, he used different frames. I'm not using frames. I want this to all pack to the top of the window. I want it to all pack to the bottom. And then it kind of like fills in the in-between. It's just another way of doing things. Like if he would have flipped around frame 1 and 2, the big hello that was on top would be on the bottom, and then the enter your name would be, on the top. So just kind of moving stuff around is really the name of the game when it comes to this GUI design. I'm by no means an expert at this. I just know the very basics. So the last thing that we want to do is we want to clear this data of this created task, because we've already added on this new task element to our list of tasks here using this command. So the next time we go to make a task, we want that to be empty so that we're not having any issues with that data. So we're going to be clearing this, and to do that, we just use this delete function. So self.task create and then .delete. And so this is also going to be using the 1.0 to TK end. So the beginning of the data all the way to the end, we want that to be deleted. So at this point, I'm not going to run it first. I'm going to let you guys run this first and see what you made, because you can change around any of these elements that you would like. We can have the background of one of these light blue. I don't even know if that's a color, but we'll try it. Yeah. We'll go ahead and do something like that. But I will let you guys go ahead and run this. Are you getting a window to pop up whenever you run it? Should be kind of what you're seeing. Yes, no? How are people doing with this? I know most of the people in here are IEEE guys. You should be following along.
Yeah, I've been working on my math homework.
That's all right. We appreciate the moral support, Ethan. I got a thumbs up from Jackie. So let's go ahead and try this out. So this is what we had before. Well, let's go add, I'm not really big into omelets, but my roommate likes them. So I want to get some eggs from the store. So I'm going to say buy eggs. I'm going to hit enter, and you'll see that it adds it here. And actually that was one of the things that I ended up changing was this light blue background. So it was a color. I just kind of guessed. I didn't even know if light blue was going to be recognized. It was kind of a hope. But there, got light blue. And then if I type in another one, I also need milk for my cereal. So get milk. There you go. And so this is actually the same style as the first one up there. So you'll see the first to-do one label. It's going to be all the way at the top. And it's going to say add items here. The background is going to be light gray. So you see the light gray. Foreground is black. Foreground is black. So it's seeing that as the first entry in these color schemes. And then the second one that we added, so the second entry in this, but it's really our first to-do item, is going to be light blue with a foreground of white, which is exactly what happens. Maybe we want to change that. I think we just want to change that to blue. And we'll go ahead and run this again. Go ahead and save it, run it. There we go. So you can see the background is a pretty intense blue. And then if I do this again, we're going to get that. But what if I go ahead and fill this up? Well, unfortunately, after a certain point, you'll see that like you run out of space. The only way that you can add more space is to resize this. And you'll see that these actually kind of shrink and collapse. It's kind of funny how that happens until you have nothing left. There's no minimum size that we had set to our window, so you can just collapse this until you can't see anything else. So it will extend down here, and I can add more. So this is kind of like what we were seeing earlier with Jack's example. Like his name was longer than the text box, but the program still remembers that all of that data is there. So if you go ahead and pull this down, it's still all there. It doesn't go away, which is pretty cool. And then what you were saying earlier about the fill, the stretch for the X, check it out. You can shrink it, you can expand it, but it's going to stretch to the X. It's going to stretch to whatever that X coordinate is that it's pulled out to. I can stretch this all the way across my screen if you want. I know it's off of my shared screen, but I think it looks good as it is now. Unfortunately, though, whenever we close the program and go ahead and run this again, all of our stuff is going to be gone. So if you guys have some creative ways to save this into a file and then open up that file, usually you have to have something that's almost always there. It's going to have to be an exact location. So like your C drive and then a folder under your C drive, that's where your file is. That's where your file will always be. So whenever this loads up, it'll load stuff in that file, set it up properly, and you're good to go. Otherwise, you can figure out how to delete things. And yes, I do have code that will incorporate both deleting and scrolling in your window, but we're not going to be covering that tonight. I meant for this to be a little bit shorter of a workshop. So any questions so far? Now that we have some working code, any questions? You guys want me to change anything in here? Oh yeah, I do want to stop the program. Are there any, advancements do you think I could make to this code to make it a little bit more user-friendly? I can tell you now that there is a way to change the styles of the code, which or the styles of the window, so you can make it look like it's in like the OS X style, or in a I don't know, like a Linux style, like an Ubuntu Windows style. There are certainly ways to do that.
Seems fun.
What's that?
I said that seems fun.
Yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and take a look at that. I don't have that up right now, but let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and pull up some styles in Tkinter.
There's you mentioned the colors by the hex. Is it the hex or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the hex values.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and I'll share my screen. We'll do hex color picker. So actually, Google has one built in. Let me go ahead and share my screen. We'll just do the portion of the screen. So can you see this window here?
Yeah.
Sweet. So let's go for like a nice like mint color. I don't know what would be like a mint. It'd be like a mint.
That looks minty to me.
It looks pretty darn minty. So let's go ahead. We're going to grab this hex value. And then we'll go back to our file here. And I think if I can make this background that, I think. Let's go ahead and try to run this. Run module. Yep. Oh, no, it doesn't like that. Maybe I have to put the identifier that it's hex. Let's try that. Yeah. There we go. So yeah, you have to have the little pound symbol or hashtag, if you will, in there to denote that it's a hex value. But you can see you can get super accurate colors. So when you're designing an interface, although it may be pretty basic looking, you can get the colors at least pretty close to what you want. So yeah, let's do another color real quick. I'm just curious. Now I'm hooked on this. I want to make it look pretty. Is it good? Let's do like a brown, maybe. Like a dark brown for our text color. Let's go ahead and grab that hex value. And we'll go back. We want the foreground instead of white. Let's do it like that. Kind of looks gross on its own, but it might look nice in here. So as I'm doing this, think about how you can have these just as overall styles. So if you want your whole program styled a certain way, set up a variable, set up one of these dictionaries and say, hey, I want all of the foregrounds this color or shades of this color. I want all of the backgrounds shades of this color. So it's a nice way to do like almost CSS styles in here. There we go. Okay, it looks kind of gross. I'll be honest, maybe not the best color choice. We can switch it back to black or something. But yeah, so that's just a great example of how this can be really customizable and really user-friendly. Another thing was the padding on the Y. Let's change this to like 7. I'll go ahead and run this again. And yeah, it wants me to save. Just hit OK. You can see they're actually a little bit smaller. So the padding on the top and bottom, instead of having 10 pixels, it's going to be 7 pixels. So if I just want to do that, see, I can show more per screen without having to drag it down again. And then again, you can resize the window so you can fit more in there. You can set this to stop at a certain point so it won't accept any more entries. So yeah, kind of fun stuff like that. There's a lot you can do with this, and we actually followed a guide. I will be fully transparent. We did kind of copy and paste some of this stuff, but it's a really good guide for learning by example, and it's really just called Learning Tkinter by Example. I'm going to be sharing it in the recording video that I post down in the description, and hopefully I can share it also in the email that I send out so that people can do some of this stuff. But one of the things it doesn't do well is showing you, hey, like you can customize these little things and make the program have a completely different feel, completely different look. If we wanted to have the to-do entries stacked from the bottom to the top, we can do that just by setting a couple of things here. So I think this here we can just change to bottom. Let's try that. Let's run the module. I believe this will stack up from the bottom. I actually haven't tried this yet. Yeah, there we go. So then, you know, if you get clearing items down, what you can do is you can say, okay, delete this, and everything kind of shuffles down. So it's almost like you get stuff done, you cleared off your plate kind of style. And then of course like I said, there are different styles, different fonts that we can have for here. We can change the font size. We can change this all to Times New Roman if we want. But yeah, so there's a lot of customization, a lot that you can do with more than just what I've shown here. Let me grab another example maybe if I can. Let me stop sharing my screen. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and load up the complete. Oh, I still can't minimize Zoom. Keep forgetting that. Let me go ahead and pull up the complete one on here if I can. Oh, it is in, it's in another folder. Let's go ahead and download this. Keep it. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen again. So let's do this, portion of screen. All right, so you can see kind of this black, and then I have my to-do app. Yes, no? You guys see this? Okay, cool. So this is very similar to the basic one that we made, but you'll notice that there's actually a scroll wheel here. And if you go ahead and click on these, it'll ask, a pop-up, do you want to delete this? And this will bring it to the center of your screen. I'm only sharing half my screen. That's why this is cut off. But yes, I want to delete that A. Or here, let's put one in. Let's delete all of these because I can. I'm feeling particularly maniacal today. So, and we can see exactly which ones we've deleted. We can scroll up and down. So we want to delete F. We don't like F. We'll get out of here. You can see it just removes it from this list. We can still resize. We can still resize this way too. And you'll see that the scroll bar on the side is dynamic, which is pretty cool. After a certain point though, you'll notice that stops moving and then the text box closes. Maybe just a quirk of the program, but overall pretty cool. And I'm glad I can share some of that stuff with you. You see my desktop there for a second. So any closing questions before we end things tonight?
It's definitely definitely a lot easier to use than JavaFX. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's once you get to a certain point of being comfortable with it, it kind of becomes easy to a point, which is a little bit weird. By the way, Will, thank you for posting that in there. I actually had pulled that up on my screen over here, I think. Yeah, we pulled up the same exact thing. But yeah, let me see, maybe if I can. No, this is going to be a little bit difficult to integrate to what I have so far, I think. Maybe. Well, in any case, I encourage people to explore on their own the different styles and themes and such. But if you guys don't have any more questions or closing thoughts, I think I'm going to end it out here. Thank you so much for coming. I really do appreciate it. Again, this is probably going to be the last workshop of the semester. I may just post something and share it with you guys if there's like a mini tutorial. I definitely want to show people how to use a shift register just as like a mini tutorial, maybe over winter break if people are bored and they want to get their hands on something. Maybe I'll show them how to use something maybe in the kits that they got from EE 210 or EE 200, some parts that you may have laying around. I'm hoping to do a little video on that. So anything else?
No, thank you so much.
Sweet. Hey, thank you for coming. We really appreciate it.